Lost by David Whyte. Stand still. The trees ahead and the bushes beside you are not lost. Stand still. The trees ahead and the bushes beside you are not lost. Wherever you are is called here. And you must treat it as a powerful stranger, must ask permission to know it and be known. The forest breathes. Listen. The forest breathes. Listen. Listen. It answers, I have made this place around you. I have made this place around you. If you leave it, you may come back again saying, here. No two trees are the same to raven. No two bushes are the same to wren. If what a tree or a bush does on you is lost, then you are truly lost. The forest knows. Stand still. The forest knows where you are. You must let it find you. It's a beautiful poem by a great American poet, David Whyte, all around the power of listening to find our way, to reorientate our inner compass when we find ourselves lost in a dark wood. And David Whyte shows us that the way out of that dark wood is through the sense of listening. And so that's one of the topics that I'm going to be covering here in our very brief time together. This is like a speed dating version of the kind of leadership work that I do, which often takes years and years. In fact, it's a path that is never completed, actually, the one of mastering one's leadership of yourself and also the leadership of others that you may be entrusted to. So it's wonderful to be here as part of the Leadership Communication Exposition, hosted by the unstoppable, the inspiring, the indubitable Tammy Lee. So thank you, Tammy, for the invitation to be here amongst these luminaries of leadership. It's a really special gathering of people. And the work that Tammy does indeed is very special too, bringing resolution to places where there is conflict. So very important work. And I think part of this, the intention of this gathering of leadership knows, the intuition of this gathering knows that we are in a moment of great change and transition in our economy, in our society, in our world, and a new type of leadership is being called for. A new kind of leadership is being asked to step up at this time. And that's why you are here. The forest knows where you are, and all we need to do is to let that leadership find us. Actually, we know where that is already. So all we need to do is to drop into this place of listening to let that emerge. So I'm going to give you a brief introduction as to who I am and how I ended up here. Then I'm going to tell you what I'm going to try to express. I'll just give you little sort of bites of information, and if you want more, you know where to find me. And then I'm going to end with a song. If you stay long enough, you'll get a lovely old Irish song that you can sing along with wherever you are at home. So my name's Owen Ó Súilleabháin, and I'm a singer and a musician by trade from a family of singers and musicians. Both my parents were great stores of Irish traditional culture, of ancient Irish traditional culture that I and my brother inherited. I still perform and work with my mother. She's a great source of Irish traditional song from the sacred tradition. And so I learned all of that with her, and a lot of the Celtic spirituality that is contained within the culture. And what I love to do is to bring this inherited wisdom from the arts into our organizational lives and into our life of leadership. And in former times, until quite recently in our society, leaders were always connected with artistry and indeed with their own sense of spirituality. And it's only in the last sort of 40, 50 years that leadership and artistry and a sense of spirituality, a connection with the soul, have become out of favor. And perhaps as we go forward into our new world of leadership, that perhaps we need to bring in the arts and bring in the sense of soul. One of my mentors in this work of bringing the arts into the organizational world is a man called David Whyte. And David Whyte is a great poet himself. And in the 90s, he published a wonderful book called The Heart Aroused, Poetry and the Preservation of the Soul in Corporate America. Poetry and the Preservation of the Soul in Corporate America. And then about 12 years ago, I started to perform and work with David at his events, and to see how he weaves poetry and artistry and shows how the wisdom that is in poetry and artistry is vital. It's the lifeblood of a sense of connection and a sense of meaning with one's relationship to your work, yourself, and to the others that you hold near and dear. So the three things that I want to talk about here today, the title that I sort of came up with when Tammy invited me to take part in this was Leading with the Ear of the Heart, how to listen and lead with conscience, And the word conscience has recently come up in my research, and it was something I want to play around with and introduce to you today. So there are three things that we're going to work at that I'm going to speak to about. First of all, why would you listen to conscience? Why would a leader listen to conscience? The second, how do you listen to your conscience? And the third question is how to make a perfect decision. How to make a perfect decision. So we listen to our conscience in order to make a perfect decision. How do you listen to your conscience? We listen to our conscience through this imaginative faculty of an ear not of our heads, but the ear of our heart. And how do we make that perfect decision, having discovered this? We do that by, there is a great methodology that was devised by the ancient Greeks and the Romans called the 4 cardinal virtues. And I'm going to give you a quick whistle-stop tour of those before we're done. But the first thing is why to listen to your conscience. We listen to our conscience to know right from wrong, to know the good from the bad. And each of us knows within ourselves where that point, where that line lies. So the line between good and evil runs through each human heart. As the great Russian writer Alexander Solzhenitsyn once said, the line between good and evil runs through every human heart. It's our own faculty. It's a self-diagnosing scenario. Actually, you know yourself if the path you're on is the right path for you. And that path may be different at different points of our lives and for different people too. And we know that at one point in our lives, it is the right thing to do. And in another context, that wouldn't be the right thing to do. And so this is fascinating in the world of leadership, because the leader is the person who makes the decisions. The buck stops there. Indeed, the job of a leader could be the job of a decider. That's what the person is doing. They're constantly making these decisions. And in order to make a decision, there are two ways to approach that. There are two ways to approach the decision. And one is to do it through economics, through the bottom line. And will this decision result in more financial profit? And that's one way of making a decision. But there's another way of making a decision. And that is to look at wealth. Wealth, as in being wealthy, is the definition of being well. And wealth comes from wholeness, from a sense of wholeness, where you do not feel divided from a different part of yourself. So real wealthy is about well. And well is comes from the word good, you know. Is this decision good? And if it is goodly, it is well. And if you're well, you're wealthy. So there's two ways to approach those decisions. If you want to approach a decision from the context of the financial bottom line, well, then there are calculations that will produce that result. You can devise systems, you can game things out and allow for a rational abstraction to make that decision for you, absolving you of any guilt even, you know, in that decision. And very many decisions are made like that in our world, calculated decisions, which disregard entirely the whole context of a decision. The context of a decision where something will be truly well and wealthy. So in order to do that, there is a faculty that each human is born with, and we call that a conscience. And conscience comes from the Latin word science, conscience. Science is scio, sciere, to know something. Con means with. And you know something deeply, you know something that is pre-existing, that resonates with you. It's a recognition, actually, of a truth. And our conscience, when you see something that's right, it's almost like you remember something. It's like an aha moment. I see. You almost recall it. You know, it's that feeling. So the conscience resides within each and every one of us. But accessing this conscience is a habit, actually. We can get into the habit of listening to our conscience, or we can get into the habit of ignoring that voice. And if we have gotten into the habit of ignoring it, we can rebuild that faculty. We can rebuild it. Now, how do you listen to your conscience? How do you do it? You do it through the ear of the imagination, the ear of your heart, because it sounds right. It sounds good. And you know yourself. Each one of us knows ourselves, whether something is right or wrong. One of the great hallmarks of a knowing of the conscience is what's called the golden rule. And the golden rule exists across many, many different spiritual and philosophical traditions around the world. And the golden rule goes something like this. Do to other people what you would like to be done to you. Or don't do to someone else what you wouldn't like to be done to you. The golden rule. The whole idea of karma from the Hindu tradition is along those lines, that which you do will be returned to you. Each person will get what is due to them. You know, there's someone making a list and you will be rewarded or punished in the next life. Eventually, this will catch up with you, you know, the way you've been acting will catch up with you in some way or another, in one way or another. And it may not seem to the whole world, may see you as perhaps the most wealthy person in the world, but there'll be some part of your life where you'll know that you're living in a hell that you've created for yourself. And you could be someone else without a penny in the world, and yet have within you this beautiful sense of contentment and gratitude and a heaven that you've created for yourself too. So the golden rule, do unto others as you wish to be done to yourself. The old cynical reading of the golden rule is, I was working with a person who was in a consulting company in Canada, and they were doing a lot of work with mining companies in Canada. And very often people will laugh at the golden rule and say that the golden rule is he with the gold makes the rules. He with the gold makes the rules. Which is true up to a point. That if you do have the gold, you do make the rules, but you better be careful what you wish for, because those rules will come back and haunt you, unless you have been doing to others what you wish to do to yourself. There's the great myth of King Midas, the Midas touch, the ancient Greek mythology. That Midas was granted his wish. He wished everything he touched would turn to gold. So he touched his plate and turned to gold. He touched the table, it turned to gold. And he thought this was the most amazing thing. He ran out into the garden and touched the flowers. They turned to gold. The trees in the orchard, they all turned to gold. And he said, come on, we'll have a feast. We must celebrate this. And as they were all sitting at the table and the food was being brought to him, he touched his food and it turned to gold. He couldn't eat it. Touched his drink, turned to gold. He couldn't drink it. And at that moment, his daughter came in, his most loved, only daughter. And she ran over to him and kissed him on the cheek, and she turned to gold. And in a telling of the story, he starts to cry and a tear falls on his daughter. And it is the tear of Midas that brings her back to life. So she with the gold makes the rules. So you do, yeah. So the golden rule is one of the bedrocks of assessing whether something is going to settle with your sense of conscience or not. And we must listen to that voice, and we must listen deeply and continually. It's a continuous practice that involves silence and stillness and the absence of anxiety and fear. One of the title of my talk is to listen with the ear of the heart, and I've taken that image from one of the great founders of organizational life in our Western tradition, a man called Saint Benedict, who lived in the 5th century in Italy as the Roman Empire was collapsing. Benedict retreated from society and founded a community, a spiritual community. And Benedict is credited as being the founder of the Western monastic tradition of monks and monasteries. And he wrote a rule, the Rule of Saint Benedict, which could be defined as the oldest continuous corporate manual in recorded history. It's been running for 1,500 years. And this corporate manual has been the basis of successful organizations across all countries, across all societies. You'll find Benedictine monasteries all over the world, even to this day. And it's a very simple rule. And the very first word of this rule is a Latin word. It was all written in Latin. The Latin word ausculta, which is to listen. But it's a very particular type of listening. It's a listening of the imagination. Benedict describes it as to listen with the ear of your heart. So this is the first word that he says to his communities. The most important thing, actually, about living in a community, about working in a successful organization, of leading a successful organization. Benedict says to listen. And perhaps too, as the Roman Empire was collapsing, perhaps Benedict was responding and reacting to a society which was not listening at the time, which was failing to listen. And perhaps when we fail to listen, indeed, certainly when we fail to listen, we fail in our interpersonal, in our relationships, and in our relationship with ourselves too. And listening is the first act of relationship. It's the first act of being in the world, to listen to ourselves and to listen to others. So Benedict talks about listening with the ear of the heart. Yeah. And finally, I want to say a word about that idea of how to make a perfect decision. So we've learned how to listen to our conscience. We've learned why our conscience is so important for wellness. We've learned how to listen to the conscience using the ear of the heart and the golden rule. Now, how do you activate this foundation into perfect decision making? And this is something I've been studying recently, which is known as the 4 cardinal virtues. The 4 cardinal virtues. And again, this goes way back to ancient Greek civilization. Plato in the Republic, his book called The Republic. This is around 500 BC, 2,500 years ago. And Plato, who was one of the founders of our Western philosophical tradition, Plato wrote a book called The Republic, in which he envisaged the perfect utopian organization. And it's a seminal work that has defined so much of our own definition of what organizations are today. And he refers to these four cardinal virtues. And in it, he refers to the four cardinal virtues as if they are an ancient inherited concept, even back 2,500 years ago. So we don't know exactly when they're from. There's also reference to them in the Hebrew texts, in the book of Solomon, also mentions these four cardinal virtues. The word virtue, from the Latin vir, we have the word virile. These were considered a warrior code at one stage, a code by which one would live or die when faced with the struggle of being in the world, the sense of battle of being in the world. And it wasn't, they observed that it wasn't the warrior that was the most deft at their use of weaponry or of wielding the most powerful violence, but it was the person that was most in touch with their virtue that survived and lived to protect what was most precious in the world around them. So very briefly, the four virtues, we have number one, and they're in order actually, these virtues. The most important virtue is translated as prudence. Prudence. And that word sounds very old-fashioned and sort of stuffy to our ear today. But prudence comes from the Latin word providens, to see, foresight, to see ahead, to be able to predict the future. Actually, is prudence, to make a good decision, to know that this decision will take us up there or that decision will take us down there. So it's this ability to foresee, and that is at the root of making the perfect decision, that concept of prudence. And without prudence, the rest of the virtues are useless. Actually, the next virtue is the virtue of justice, knowing and justice, the old definition of justice is to each their due, to each their due. You get what is owed to you, that each person must get what is owed to them, for good and for bad. Yeah, each person is to get what is due to them. The image of justice that we have, it's on all of our courthouses to this day. Many of our courthouses built in the ancient Greek and Roman, with the pillars and the portico. And on top of the roof, you'll have a statue holding the weighing scales, which symbolizes this thing of to each their due, that you must give what you owe, and you must receive what you are owed as well. Too very often justice is seen in the other arm holding a sword, which tells you that this will be enforced, you know. And indeed it will be enforced. The third virtue, but of course, you cannot discern what is due to someone unless it is rooted in solid prudence, you see. Otherwise, it's a shot in the dark. The third virtue then is the virtue of fortitude, of courage. The ability to put yourself wholeheartedly into this struggle, into this work, wholeheartedly. And courage implies a disregard of personal injury, which means that you know that the cause that you are fighting for is more important than your own individual ego. Actually, there's something greater at play. There's something greater at play. And again, true courage can only exist if it's rooted in prudence. Otherwise, you are just grandstanding, vainglorious, showing off with your courage, machoizing, you know. But true courage is based in prudence, the prudence that you know that what you're fighting for is the good fight. It is the just fight. Yeah. And the fourth and final virtue, and indeed the least important of them perhaps, is the virtue of discipline, of temperance. Temperance. And temperance is around control, self-control. They used to use the old image of the charioteer being in control of the horse, the wild horse of our body, of our drives, of our passions. And that these passions must be directed and disciplined. that disciple, again, the word listening, that these passions must be directed by a power that is harnessing these passions that we have. And again, unless our temperance and discipline is rooted in providence, it cannot be authentic. So for example, you could be fasting in order to show how good you are. You could be holding back you could be saving all your money thinking you're being very disciplined when actually you're being very miserly and you're not sharing wealth with others. So all of this temperance must be directed from a great sense of prudence. Are you doing this discipline for the right reasons and in the right way and in a moderate way too? Because we can get ourselves into terrible trouble when we try to control ourselves to an extreme. Yeah, to an extreme. So there we go. I can't believe I may have bit off a little more than I can chew. And if you're still with me, congratulations. It's wonderful that you're still here. The work I do with leaders is I work individually with many leaders, and the work we do is it's long-term work, coaching work. Some of my clients I've worked with for a year, 2 years, longer, and it's all around conversation and art and trust and relationship, trust in yourself, relationship with yourself, and really overhearing yourself in conversation saying something surprising and saying something that you know has yet to be said. And all of this begins with creativity and with art. That's where all innovation begins. It begins with that energy of beauty and of poetry and of love. And so my work is entering into conversation with people who know that that is at the core of their heart. The free offer that I want to invite you to is to sign up for a 3-part course that I've co-taught with a legend in the world of executive coaching, a man called John Schuster. And John has been teaching in the Hudson Institute of Coaching for years over in California, and also at Columbia University at their coaching program. He's been teaching there for over 12 years. So he's an amazing person. I'm really honored to be in conversation with him. And we put together this 3-part course for people to study how the arts show up in the world of executive coaching. So this is for people who are coaches themselves that want to bring the arts into their coaching work, for leaders who are interested in bringing art into their conversations that you might be having with your own coaches, or for artists, any artists out there who are interested in seeing how the skills that you have acquired in the mastery of your art are beautifully applicable into the world of leadership too. So I'd like to invite you to join me for that. If you just click that link and sign up for my mailing list, you will get access to those 3 recordings. We call it the inner 360. So usually in coaching, a coach will go in and do what's called a 360 and map the landscape that the leader moves in. And this is the inner 360, which is mapping your inner landscape. And you do that through the echo soundings of artistry and conversation. And indeed, it is a lifetime of exploration on a fabulous frontier within. So I'm going to leave you now with a song. And this song is from the Irish tradition, the Celtic tradition we share it with our Celtic cousins up in Scotland. A song called The Wild Mountain Time. And in it, the refrain says, will you go, lassie, go. A lassie is a young girl. And here the young girl represents that conscience within each and every one of us. The young girl, the lassie, is the most precious thing that we have within us. So this is this beautiful song of invitation, inviting you out to say, will you come out? And will you go among the heather, where the wild mountain thyme grows around the blooming heather, and we'll all go together. So another great piece of wisdom within this song is that this must be done in community, So thank you very much for taking the time to be with me here and being with all of these other great luminaries of leadership that Tammy has so brilliantly brought together around this campfire. I look forward to hearing from you. If you have any questions at all, I would be delighted to be in conversation with you and to hear where you're coming from and what brought you here and where we might be going together. So with that, we'll give you this, and yeah, look forward to having a chat with you later. And the trees are sweetly blooming, and the wild mountain thyme grows around the blooming heather. Will you go, lassie, go? And we'll all go together to pluck wild mountain thyme all around the blooming heather. Will you go, lassie, go? I will build my love a bower neath yon pure and crystal fountain, and on it I will lay all the flowers of the mountain. Will you go, lassie, go? And we'll all go together to pluck wild mountain thyme all around the blooming heather. Will you go? If my true love were gone, I would surely find another where the wild mountain thyme Will you go, lassie? And we'll all go together to pluck wild mountain thyme all around the blooming heather. Will you go? Will you go, lassie? Or will you go, lassie?